Welcome to Now You See TV. I'm your host, Jake Grant, and tonight we are interviewing the Abaffys, the creators of the Way documentary. And this is a film that came out a year or two ago, and it was just so awesome, and it made some big waves in the Christian community. And really, I'm excited to interview these guys because it was one of the best films that kind of explained the Torah observant lifestyle, that explained feast keeping and Sabbath, and it's what I passed out to my friends and family if I wanted to show them kind of what I've been getting into, and just an excellent conversation piece. And so I'm really excited to have the Abaffys on. How you doing, guys? Welcome to Now You See TV.
Great, we're doing great. Thank you, Jake. Thanks for having us, man.
Thanks.
We're so glad you passed him out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So this documentary it was really cool. But first, I just kind of want to introduce the Abaffys. For those of you who've not seen the film, and I want to have them kind of introduce themselves. Luke is the director, and also he's the videographer for the film, and Kayte, she produced and is also a professional musician. But beyond that, could you guys tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to make this film?
Yeah.
Well, I have been a journalist for the last, I guess, 7 or 8 years, ever since I got, I'm getting old, ever since I got out of college. And so I wrote about, all sorts of things. And then I came into this understanding of the scripture, and it totally changed my life. And this is this only story I wanted to tell, because I grew up as a Christian, non-denominational church, et cetera, et cetera. She was even more entrenched in just whatever you would call, I guess, mainstream Christianity. And anyway, it rocked my world so much that I wanted to really tell this story. And we weren't able to really start on that mission until we were seeing eye to eye on it. And when we first got married, we weren't quite.
Yeah.
And anyway, she eventually did. And then we started making the film. I guess that's a little bit of background. We can tell more, though, if you want.
Now, I titled tonight's interview, Leaving Churchianity to Be More Like Jesus, and it's very similar to your subtitle for the film. And I would like to kind of ask you, what inspired you to create this film, to explain this walk that you guys were starting to go on? Why make this film?
Man, that's a good question. I didn't see anything else out there that was telling specifically this story. And I thought, well, anyone who's watching this right now, Jake, who believes kind of that the Torah is relevant for today, they're believing something that for the past 1900 years or whatever, most of mainstream Christianity has not known about. Most of it. And that's huge. That's insane. And when I realized that, I was like, for 1900 years, everyone has been wrong about everything. Not everything, of course, but many things. That was so mind-blowing. At first, I didn't believe it. And then I thought, all right, well, we got to try and see how this story can be told. That was the motivation to tell it. And then figuring out how to do it was part of really our search in coming into this and galvanizing our faith in the fact that the Torah is relevant today.
Now, for those of you who are interested, it's called thewaydoc.com is where you can find the film. I have that link in the description of this video. Now, guys, is it The Way documentary, or is The Way doc, or how is the name, the title of the film exactly?
Film is just The Way, and we have but The Way doc is our website and how you can find us and stuff, because I think there's another film called The Way. But
yes, there's another film called The Way with Emilio Estevez.
Yeah.
Totally different subject matter. But yeah, it's called The Way, leaving Churchianity to live like the Savior. But really, The Way is the name on IMDb and stuff. The Way doc is where people can find it. Yeah.
So let's just, give us a little synopsis for, people tuning in who've not seen this film. Encompass, what is this film really telling us about? What story did you guys present in this film?
Well, what you mentioned about the tagline of the film is really like the thesis and the heart of it. And for me, growing up, just in evangelical kind of non-denominational Christian circles, it became a big question for me once I finally started seeing it, which is, if we only have one perfect example of how to live a human life, and that is our Savior, and we see him doing all these really specific things, how is it that we say he's perfect but don't emulate these things? And like, why is it that we live in a way that diverges in a lot of key points? And most of those key points are like the outward manifestations of our faith, like how we eat, what holidays we celebrate, how we dress, et cetera, et cetera. So basically the film has two parts. The first part is like historical background and research about at what point like the church diverged from these different things that Jesus was doing. And then the second half of the film shows people who learn these things and they want to make changes in their life and what happens when they do.
Wow, that's really interesting. And, you know, for those who have watched Now You See TV for a time, you understand that we're right on board with all of that. And, you know, it's all about being more like our Messiah. And there's so much that we've inherited that kind of separates from, you know, being more like him because of just traditions and different doctrines that really isolate who Jesus was as a Jew who kept the Torah, and they make being a modern day Christian something entirely separate. And I'd like to kind of get into some of the topics in the film of where people are starting to say, hey, you know, I'm going to start walking this out because Yeshua did.
Sure, we can drill down into some of them. I mean, like Kayte said, a lot of them are these outward things, the way you live, like the food you eat, basically, the clean food, and saying, oh, no, I'm not going to have this unclean food. This is one of the first things as a Christian for me that I would often tell people once I came into this, like, it would be a point in conversation. We're just going on about business, and then I say, oh, well, I don't eat pepperoni on the pizza, or whatever it is. And so it's like a touch point in your life. And that's just one of them. There's, you know all of them. And having these physical outward touch points as you go throughout your life is very interesting. And that's part of what the film is about.
It kind of shows a lot of the rationale of laws that we may have read or heard about in the Old Testament that before I was thinking, oh, this was for a different time and space. They didn't understand certain things scientifically that now we do, we can handle. And so we don't really need these laws anymore. But the more you look at them, the more you're like, no, this is actually still really practical. Like, you know, the oysters and the shrimp are still like filtering the ocean just like they used to, and they have like a purpose. They can have a purpose aside from being food. Or like, you know, when you look at these feasts, I was seeing all this rich theological like juiciness about the work of, you know, Yeshua and what he came to do. And I was like, well, why wouldn't you want to do something that's so like laden with meaning like that? It becomes harder to like not do them when you see all this goodness in them. And we hope to like kind of unearth some of that in the movie.
Hopefully.
It's really exciting with those concepts because when you start to actually walk out these commandments in the Torah that have just the modern Christian church has hid their eyes from it, you start to learn these awesome spiritual concepts that God has always been wanting to teach us along the way. Like, for example, the clean food. Whenever you learn that God cares, you know, about what you put into your body. And first it starts off with walking out that commandment of clean food, unclean food. Then you learn the spiritual concept of, oh, God cares about what you put into your mind as well. And you have to discern between clean and unclean media, for example. And it just, there's so much to it. And, you know, not to mention the feast that you guys were talking about that just shows so many aspects of the Messiah and who he is and what he's going to accomplish and what he has accomplished. It's so exciting. And one thing I really liked about the film that I'd like to ask you guys about is you did interview people who were not on this boat. They totally disagreed with this mentality that the Torah is for believers today. And I'd like you guys to maybe share a little bit about those experiences interviewing these pastors and these priests that really it was so fascinating. So how did those interviews go, and how did you kind of phrase the questions so that they could share? Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting how you implemented them in the film, but also kind of provided an answer for their excuses for why people shouldn't keep the Torah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was interesting conversation. We opened the film with this question, me asking this priest in New York City, the same question Kayte said earlier: if Jesus is, how we said it, is the only perfect example of a human, then why don't we do all these things that he did? And then I mentioned, the food laws, etc. And he's flabbergasted. And then we ask maybe he just had never thought of that before. And then we ask a pastor, we ask a congregant, and it's the same kind of no answer. And so that is kind of the gist of the film. And those interviews were so critical because we wanted to just get a normal reaction from people either working in the religious industry or whatever you want to call it, or just who are experienced, who know the Bible well. And we wanted to try and air out these questions, the question and response.
I think as a journalist, Luke's really good at research and getting firsthand sources for things. And like in the world we live in now, there's so much stuff online. There's like memes floating around. They're just like bold-faced lies. Like it's hard to parse out what is actually Bible evidence. So our goal was, if we had a question about the early church, let's go to someone who that is like their absolute specialty. Or like if we had a question about, a pagan holiday, let's ask a pagan person who still does this holiday to explain the meaning in her perspective. Instead of, because it's one thing for you to say to like a friend or family member, like, this is what I've learned about, and they're like, whatever. But if you get somebody who that's their specialty, and that's, I think it's easier to hear that information from somebody that is like dedicated their whole life studying it.
And on this topic, Kayte had a great idea, which was to find, she alluded to this, a heathen priestess to interview her about the origins of Christmas and Easter and how she claims that they are taking her holidays of Saturnalia and Ishtar or whatever and using them, stealing accoutrement from that. And so Kayte had that idea. We found this woman who really wanted to talk about this and was super excited about getting to tell her side of the story. And so we did interview her, and I hope it was powerful.
Yeah, that's one of the interviews in the film that most people who say something about it react to that one in particular, because there's a shot of her Christmas tree. It's a Yule tree, she calls it. And it just, stunning. Like,
it looks like a Christmas tree. Yeah, she's celebrating so Yule, wild. She called it.
There are so many things, and the way she described like the eggs and Easter and the bunnies and like.
And the sacrifices she does to like Odin and stuff. Like most of that was off, like not in the film, but it's just wild.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the things I so appreciated it, because it was a wide perspective of Christianity, and even just opinions on the holidays and the traditions that we've inherited as modern Christians as a whole. And you guys didn't just interview people who were Torah observant believers or Messianic. You interviewed all facets of Christianity. And that's why I think really the film had such a value to offer to people, because this is something that is worldwide, and that's something you bring out in the film, and I'd like to ask you about. But you really demonstrated some of the reactions that people probably got whenever they went to their priest or to their pastor and were like, hey, what do you say about this? Or what do you say about this? And some of the very reactions that you got and captured and put on the film, I'm sure are very similar to what people experienced when they were making that exit from the traditional Sunday keeping Easter and Christmas Christianity. And so it's really cool, because you were kind of preparing people who were going to be leaving all types of denominations and types of Christianity for what they would be experiencing in those conversations. And that kind of brings into the topic of, this is a very wide thing that's happening all across the world. And I wanted you guys to maybe comment on this. I mean, that's something you brought out in the film that is really interesting. how is this a worldwide movement that you're seeing of people returning to these biblical values?
Well, oh my goodness. People from all around the world reached out to us, like emailed us from Croatia. Someone volunteered to do Croatian subtitles for the film, so we have them now.
Yeah.
To Australia, New Zealand, English speaking, all over the world, everywhere, Britain took over. That seems to be a hotbed for this, from England to New Zealand to here.
Even other places, probably every continent, like have a touch point with someone, which is so wild.
Fiji, like it's
Micronesia,
just the Commonwealth of Micronesia, I think is what it's called. Yeah, this is happening everywhere, and we have traveled around a little bit and visited a couple congregations, and it does seem to be the same thing. It's like this. The only thing you can call it is a worldwide, like, grassroots revival. That's the best term I can put on it, because it is Holy Spirit or Ruach, led, however you want to say it. And it doesn't seem to be, it has no central brain leading the whole thing. It's just people who maybe they don't even know anyone who believes this way. That's like, as you know, that's how most of the people in this movement are. Like, they're in the mountains of Montana. They're in the outback of Australia. It's wild. It's exciting.
And in the movie, getting to, like, even though all the people that we've met come from such different places, different denominations. Some of them, like, weren't Christians before. They just were looking at other things and ended up finding this. The story is so similar, like the arc of what happens, like, you realize it, and there are things that you want to change. Then there's kind of like some friction, and you're trying to find a community. And so it was cool to be able to take everyone's story and, like, sink it into one arc and show, like, that commonality, like, that we were hearing when we would interview people all over. Yeah,
she said the arc exactly. It's like, it's getting this pushback from the people who believe the same way you did. I mean, sort of still do, but who are in the church you grew up in, and then finding a community of like-minded people seems to be the difficult part for a lot of people.
Yeah, we always get people asking for fellowship. I mean, there's all kinds of online fellowships because we are all so kind of dispersed. And I think for certain reasons, God had it that way, because we kind of start our own little communities wherever he places us all over the world. And then we kind of connect in as we learn, hey, there's somebody just down the road who's doing the same thing. But it's super interesting. And I wanted to ask you kind of about the feasts, and as you guys have started to practice out the feasts and see other people's practice out the feasts, really they become that location where you find that in-person fellowship and just the blessing of getting to come together during the appointed times and stuff. So would you guys kind of comment on the biblical feasts and how that is a place that people have found each other, and how it's blessed you as you've begun to walk out these biblical feasts that you talk about in the film?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there's so much to say about the feasts. You jump in when you want, but I'll start. Like, our first Sukkot that we spent, Feast of Tabernacles, was in Orosi, California, with the Growing in Torah group, and it was awesome. It was awesome.
It was like the most fun week ever. At first, I was like, we're gonna camp with like 200 people we've never met for a week, and we're like, what if it's like, they're insane, what if it's horrible? It was the best thing ever. Like, we didn't want to leave, and it passed so quickly, and it was this amazing.
It's like all day you get to talk about this stuff with people who care.
Yeah.
Which you forget that doesn't happen very often throughout the year. But when you're there, you have 7 days a week of people who really care about all this stuff you want to talk about. And at least at this place where we were. Yeah. And so you get to do that all day, and then you eat with them, and you commune with them, and you talk with them, and blah, blah, blah.
Like, barbecue cook-offs, and you're going from campfire to campfire, and someone's like, I'm learning this, and like, this is going on. You're like, your head, is exploding, and you're in nature, and
we've done a couple different sorts, but that one is my favorite. Like, getting together with quite a few people was great. And the other feasts, I mean,
Passover's been amazing, and it's like coming up, and the fellowship that we would go to in California when we lived out there, I think they have everyone share like their testimony at Passover because it's about crossing over from death to life, and there's so many like cool, meaningful, I don't know, just elements of them. And also, I personally feel this really cool connection that I never had to all like the patriarchs in the Bible and to Yeshua. That I'm like, we're doing the same things. It's really cool. I feel so much more folded into the story, and like it's my like you know something that I've like inherited too, as opposed to just like a thing that I would read about. And so it's kind of exciting.
That's true. It does make you feel like, when you start to observe these things, a character in the Bible, because you're part of the, Israel kind of spread out. You're talked about. And that I hadn't really felt that before. I just felt like, oh, I'm an American guy. I have nothing to do with any of this.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a heritage that's being restored by God, and it's so cool because I know when I was growing up, I was always wanted to be part of like a mafia family, like an Italian mafia family, because they always had like that cool like, you're my family and I want to do things for you. But whenever you restore this biblical identity, you don't become a part of a mafia family, of course, but you become part of really a biblical identity of being the people of Israel. We're grafted in as believers, and it's so cool because you see that the book really it is your heritage, and it's no longer just things you can apply. It's metaphorical. It's cool. You can talk about it in your church, but instead it's an identity piece that reveals to you how to walk out your life and how to pass things down to your children. And before we move further off into that topic, you mentioned something, Kayte, that I wanted to ask you about. You guys interviewed a lot of people, and you got a lot of very powerful testimonies for this film. Could you share some of these testimonies that you heard from people that were sharing about this awakening that's happening across the body of Christ?
The first one I actually thought of was one that isn't actually in the film, but an interview that you did. And you probably remember this. There was a pastor who reached out to us and said he was preparing for his Sunday sermon. And I think in the middle of the night, you can help me finish this if I forget, but I think he heard, the father just being like, you need to resign. And then he just does. The next morning,
day.
he just goes to church and like resigns, and everyone's like, what's going on? And he like lays everything out. He's and he asks like, I want to just start from scratch, and I need to understand what I'm teaching people, and like just completely like rinse out my mind and start over. And that's how he like came into this. But I remember hearing that and thinking like, that is really wild faith. Like he didn't even know yet what it was he was going to learn.
Yeah, he hadn't learned anything about this. He just had this dream, and he had this in the past where he just followed and good things happened. And also he just knew it was the voice of the Father. And so when he woke up, he quit his job in front of his whole family. They all go to the church. He had spent his whole life being groomed to become a pastor. And now that he was for a while, this is what happened. And he quits, and then he put all the biblical dictionaries, encyclopedias, Bibles on his living room table. And he's like, I'm not leaving the house until I figure out what's going on. And that's how he discovered this. And man, I wish we could have had some of that in there. I messed up the audio on that interview. I haven't said this before on camera, but I messed up the audio. I'm sorry to the interviewee. I need to let him know that that's why. But anyway,
there were several like pastors, like Arthur Bailey, who's in the documentary, talks about being pastor of a Presbyterian church and studying the Sabbath with his church and having his congregation actually be like, we should keep this. And when they started and the denomination heard, they basically like gave him this ultimatum that he can't be teaching that this is the actual Sabbath. And he ended up just like leaving the denomination and kind of like so that he could pursue what he, trying to keep the 10 Commandments. So, we heard from pastors and people who were like really involved in their churches.
One of the most emotional interviews I think that we had was with this woman in San Diego whose husband does not agree with these things, and she just keeps her relationship, and they get along and everything, but she talks a lot about walking alone in this faith, and how no matter what happens she will continue to walk alone, and because she knows that that's what the Father has for her. And so it's emotional, and that was it was a really good interview.
Yeah, it's inspiring, and like that was a really inspiring one for me because so many people have such you have to have a lot of courage, I guess, to make those kind of changes that might potentially separate you from the community that you're most rooted in.
Some of your best friends, some of your family. And then it reminds us, always reminds me of the verse that Yeshua will come as a sword to divide. Yeah. Basically, family is what he says.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So I mean, that does bring up this topic of how have people reacted to this film that didn't react positively. I guess that would mean they reacted negatively, but how so? Because whenever people share this newfound revelation that the whole Bible is for them, that the Torah is something that is good and it's an instruction for our walk as believers, we come against some not too pretty stuff. So from the testimonies that you had shared and from your own experiences with how people reacted with the film, how are people reacting negatively towards this topic, and why so?
In the film, well, you can probably weigh in more, but in the film, we show this experience of the people in the film presenting this newfound belief to their friends and family, their people doing the congregation sometimes, and they think they'll be just as excited as I was to find this stuff out. And oftentimes the people aren't as excited. They think they're like, oh, you're Seventh-day Adventist now, right? They just try and put you in a box. They try to find the box and put you in it. Are you a Jew? Are you a Seventh-day Adventist? Are you a Messianic Christian? And they want to find this thing, this preconceived idea, so they don't have to think about the topic anymore, and they can move on with their life and go to Max and Irma's now after church. So I think that's the main thing, is people want to quickly understand this whether it's heresy or just wrong, as quickly as they can, and then put it out of their minds. And that has a lot of different implications, and it can lead to very frustrating conversations, I think, for people.
I think one reaction that I had when first presented with all this is, finding a space in your mind for the law that's not, I'm trying to save myself. Before, I had no category for anything other than that. That's the purpose of the law. It's like you're trying to save yourself. You're trying to see if you can live up to this righteous standard so that you can be accepted into heaven. That. And the idea that it could be instructions for a good life so that you can prosper and live long and all the stuff that God actually says about it when he gives it didn't even exist in my mind. And so sometimes people will see the film and kind of hear these things, but it hasn't sunk in yet that it's like a fruit of your salvation. It's something that goes hand in hand with it. And so you still kind of get that resistance, a lot of questions from Paul and stuff, which some of them we were able to touch on in the film, and hopefully in a way that felt like a conversation. But it's so big, and there's so many verses that that would be a long study to get into everything.
We had to keep it at 90 minutes or so. Yeah. And so we couldn't address all of the points that we wanted to that are often brought up from Paul's letters of clean food, eat everything. There was a lot to address.
You guys did it in such a way that if you had, it's a good balance of you telling a story and just kind of talking about conversationally how to respond to these positions on the Apostle Paul's writings, and not turning the film into something that's really preachy or something that's just plastering verse after verse after verse in front of people to where they just kind of turn it off because it's more of a homework lesson than a story. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about how you presented the film and the whole concept, and especially addressing some of the writings of Paul and that in the New Testament.
Thank you. That wasn't just us. My sister is a playwright, and she's really good at story structure, and she was able to help us with story structure. Rebecca, I have to give her a shout out. That was a lot of help. And then the father, he really he did everything right with this. Anything that was right, he did. Anything wrong, we did. Like the audio.
So, I mean, this film has got to have been put in front of a lot of people, just from people sharing it out that didn't agree. Have you had any responses from people who saw the film who were like, hold on a second, I'm going to write these guys? And what did they say?
Who didn't agree with what you're saying?
Yeah.
You have had a couple questions, and sometimes it leads to meaningful conversations, and it usually ends at some point when they just don't respond.
Yeah.
But we try to answer whatever we can, or just give our perspective as much as we can. That hasn't happened as much. I feel like maybe no one has been upset enough to be like, let me find their email address.
I think some of the people who don't agree don't email us directly. It might be like a blog post. It might be a Facebook comment or something. If it's like, I don't know, some like Hebrew is like the Black Israelites or something. I saw like on the film's trailer on Facebook, they were writing all this stuff about like, whatever. So you get kind of that type of stuff. But most of the people who've written to us, luckily, have been people who
are interested.
Yeah, interested.
And there have been good reactions too from people's friends or family who have been like, this really explained a lot of things to me, or at least helped me identify with this movement.
Some people have like watched it and been like, yep, I'm on it, I'm on board. And other people say, at least what you do doesn't seem so freaky anymore. It's like demystified. I know what you're doing on Saturday. You're not like, slicing chickens' necks in your backyard. I kind of understand more. And I see for other people, they seem semi-normal. So at least if it demystifies it, that can be, or starts a conversation. Because obviously you can't tackle everything in a movie or a conversation, but hopefully it starts it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I did want to know, about the positive feedback, because this film really did make the circuit, in the Messianic kind of realms, and what did you hear from people who did appreciate it, and how did it affect their lives and their families' lives?
This was the most blessing of all of it, to hear these stories.
I remember just when the trailer of the film was shared, and when it first came out, I saw a couple of people shared on Facebook things like, to all my friends and family who were like wondering what I'm doing, what I believe now, like, watch this. This is my story. And I was just like, that was such a cool thing to feel like the story got captured in a way that they felt comfortable sharing with somebody else and saying, this can give you a window into what I'm doing now and why. Another one is a lady named Mandy, I think, had been sharing about like the tour and stuff with her hairdresser for a while, and it was never quite clicking. And then she goes in one day to like get her hair cut, and her hairdresser's like, I saw the way, it all makes sense. Like, I totally get it. That was just kind of a wild one. And there are a few other stories like that.
Hairdressers are particularly susceptible to the film.
Well,
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think when we saw Jason Tao, who was in the film last time, he mentioned that there were like congregations that switched from like Sunday to like worshiping on Sabbath and stuff. And a lot of people actually have written him. Like, he's gotten so many more like correspondences by millions.
Hundreds of people reach out to him. This is the guy that we kind of start with his story and we end with his story. Jason Tao, great guy, hilarious, and also very moving. His interview and his wife, their interview was one of the most
super
moving.
Earnest, sincere people.
And so many people identified with Jason that they found him and they reached out to him and they're like, Jason, tell us about this. Can you identify with this? Blah, blah, blah. And he's had a lot of feedback.
Oh, yeah. It's been cool. The last thing I'll say is just seeing people who connect because of the film. So maybe like multiple people that we interviewed who don't live near each other, and then I see them like in a picture together and they met up when they were traveling or something like that. Like, people have been able to like things like forged some friendships and connections over it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about who else was in the film and kind of some of the stuff that each of them talked about?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, we wanted to really give a good, wide perspective of this Messianic movement, Hebrew roots movement, whatever you want to call it. And so we got to interview Rob Skiba, great interview. Who else?
Arthur
Brad
Bailey, Brad
Scott,
Monty Judah, Paul Neeson,
Zach Bauer.
Yeah.
We went to his homestead and we toured the homestead, saw all of his stuff,
his guard donkey.
aquaponics. It was great.
And John Sherman from 119 Ministries and
Steve
Mutria and his wife, Torah family.
Oh man, who else?
And there are more.
A bunch of people.
Yeah.
Some guy named Steve Maltz. Most people haven't heard of him. He's an author out in England, and he's not fully in this camp, but he has a lot. I felt like he had a good perspective.
And Nathan Lawrence.
Nathan Lawrence. Yeah. He's a solid guy.
And then just different like subject matter experts, like a woman who wrote a book about the Jewishness of the early church, as she calls it. And showing how it wasn't like, boom, here's a clean break, we do Christian stuff, we do Jewish stuff. It's like all these practices, like what we're doing now.
We're blended together in early Christianity, and her whole book is about that. And she's like, a lot of historians have ignored this for generations. And so we went to Canada to interview her. She's teaching at a college there, I can't remember the name of it, Sherbrooke. And so, this Puritan guy who wrote all about Puritans,
he's
a huge
expert.
A
Puritan expert. He's not actually a Puritan. But he talked about how Puritans had made Christmas illegal and stuff, and why, and that was his perspective. And he's a person who celebrates Christmas, so he wasn't saying like don't do it. He was just saying this is a fact of like American history that people don't often talk about.
Cool. Yeah. There was a lot of people in that film, and I think the diversity of the interviews you had is really kind of what made it. And I wanted to ask you, I heard you got some nominations for this film. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. You go ahead.
Yeah, the International Christian Film Festival, which takes place in Tampa, that was last May, I think, June. They nominated the film for Best Director and Best Documentary. And then in Canada, it was
the International Faith and Family Film Festival in Canada, nominated for Best Documentary. Yeah. But it didn't win. It didn't win. Disclaimer: it just was nominated. But it was cool because they screened them there. People got to see it, and that's the coolest part. The more people that see this, especially in the mainstream Christian world, the better.
Yeah, definitely. And how long has it been since you guys put out the film? Do you know exactly how long it's been?
Yeah, August 2016. So a year and a half.
A year and a half. So what have you guys been up to since putting the film out?
Well, here, you should stand up, baby.
Oh man, he wants me to show my belly. I'm about ready to burst. That's one thing.
That's one thing. But we're also working on another documentary right now, and we can't talk about it yet. I really wanted to be able to talk about it tonight, but we can't. But we're working on that. So there's another thing in the works.
After the movie, we kind of sold all of our stuff and was like, put all your stuff in a backpack, and we traveled around for a little while. And that was fun. We got to visit some congregations in a few different places,
and we're almost finished building a tiny house. Kayte is really into tiny houses. She somehow don't let your wife watch HGTV. That's all I'm gonna say.
Building a tiny house, every day, morning till night, he's out there hammering and nailing and making roofs and walls, and it's crazy. But
I just put the roof on, and so it's pretty much fully enclosed now, and we can
it's on wheels.
Soon move into it.
Yeah, we're looking for land to take it to, but that's been a big project. How do you make a house from scratch? So.
These are the things we should do.
What got you into tiny houses? So you guys are really going to move into the tiny house?
Yeah.
I guess.
in time for having a baby too,
Yeah.
which maybe wasn't a good idea.
Well, when we were traveling from Hartford, we like lived in a van.
In Australia and New Zealand, when we were traveling there, we were driving around the country, and the best way to see it is in like a van. You're like a camper van. You know, you go around and you
really
camp.
like an outfitted minivan.
Yeah.
But you can like camp in all these different places. It's beautiful. You just drive around and you stay in the van. And one day in the van, I was like, "This is really like spacious. I kind of like it." I'm like, "Spacious? What am I saying?" But I like the
really
idea
small.
of the like, well, yeah, for me, like the simple living, like paring down all your stuff, being more minimal, and like it makes you spend more time outside. And I was like, we can probably live in a tiny house if we did this for like 2 months. So.
And then she got on the whole, you know, YouTube spiral and HGTV spiral of all this tiny house stuff. And so anyway, I agreed to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, I've always had a fascination with tiny houses, so you guys ought to give me some tips sometime because I've been looking into that myself.
Yeah, sure.
But you know, you did show off a very expectant baby bump there, and I wanted to ask you about your, you know, this whole walk that you guys are now on, that you brought out in this journey. You know, you're going to have a family that you're going to start raising up in this. And what is that to you guys? And what's that going to be like to have a kid that you know, they don't have the whole Christianity, Christmas and Easter world to have to separate out from. Instead, that they get to raise up and grow into this movement.
Pretty wild. I think it's really exciting. I was just thinking of like, you know how there's always like baby's first Christmas. I'm like, we need a baby's first Passover, like onesie or something. But I think it's fun because since, like we mentioned before, all these things that you're reading the scripture, Old Testament and New, are part of your actual daily life. It seems like it'll make teaching all of these cool things about the Word and about Father and Yeshua and stuff so much. It'll just be folded in. You'll have all these opportunities to like dive into how wonderful it is to like walk this way. So.
And of course, we're coming at it from the perspective of we haven't done it yet.
Right.
But I am excited about it because I know whenever you teach a kid something, you always learn something yourself. And so I'm excited to learn more about the feasts and everything as we teach it to the kids, and like things we haven't thought about, questions that the kid will ask, etc. I'm excited about that.
I think there are things that didn't click with me growing up that will hopefully be helpful that we can like share with our kids. One, just a basic thing is like sin. Why is sin sin and obedience is obedience? And recently, in the last couple of years, I've just been seeing how it's like obedience is choosing life and sin is choosing death. Even if you don't drop dead in the moment, it's like something that will inch you closer to not flourishing, you know? And when you think about that, you're like, okay, God's not random. He's not just like pointing to stuff saying what's sin and what's not. And you can instill that like overarching principle to your kids. I think it makes more, I don't know, it makes it easier to know why you want to do the good things that you are like teaching them to do and stuff like that. And it's not just because I said so, which sometimes it probably will be.
Yeah. I'm excited to do it.
Are you guys going to have a baby or a baby boy or girl, or do you know?
Boy, yeah, boy.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So, you know, one of the topics that comes up in the film, of course, is the topic of circumcision. And with having a baby boy, you know, is that something you guys are looking into, or how does that work?
Finding someone to do it on like the 8th day instead of the first day it's born,
that took a little bit of research, but
you found something.
Yeah.
We haven't actually even locked that down yet. We're behind the 8 ball.
Well, I guess you can't schedule it until they have a birthday, and he doesn't yet. So
That's true.
But I made the call.
But yeah, he'll, you know, this will be his first Passover, I guess, if he comes out in time, which hopefully he will.
Yeah, that'll be cool. So I know you can't share any more about kind of your next project that you're working on, but you know, what next is coming up? What things are you guys excited about in this movement? And as more and more people are starting to keep feasts and keep Shabbat and understand that the Torah is for them, you know, what do you think's coming up next? What do you think, this is just going to continue to grow? Are there going to be more films like yours? What do you think's coming out?
Yeah. What I hope will happen is that all of these disparate groups will, I don't know, eventually be galvanized, at least on the tree trunk issues of this thing, so that they can at least see eye to eye. And then eventually, I guess, Yeshua will come back. And I don't know what the steps are in between this, honestly. I'm excited for the word to spread, and I'm excited for people to start living in the fullness of what I feel we as believers are supposed to inhabit. I feel like we're supposed to be moving from life to life, from glory to glory, and blessing to blessing, as the word lines out for us. And I think that is within reach for a lot of people just by making some life changes. And as that happens, I love seeing how people's lives change for the better. And I love, my little brother grew up doing this more than I did, because I was out of the house. I was through college and working before I came into this, but he was still young. And so even seeing his life and what he's going to do is exciting. And I guess it plays into our kid. I'm glad that he will be raised in a slightly different fashion.
I have like a fluffier answer, I think. Mine's kind of fluffy.
Hers are always better.
No, it's just fluffier. I'm kind of looking forward to balance and like healing. And by that, the balance thing, I just mean like a lot of us, we're in church and then it's just like you just swing so hard the other way, and you're like everything there was wrong, and like it's very like extreme, because you have to kind of start from scratch and parse out what's what, and then you realize, okay, no, it's not like throw it all away. That there's a lot of people like have little bits of insight, and I can learn from lots of sources. So just having like a sense of balance in our life and our walk, even in conversation, like the things that come up, it probably won't be exactly the same things for all of us as it is now, as we like settle into them more. And the other thing, the healing thing, I think is really important, because the interviews in the film were so emotional, and like even conversations we have at Shabbat groups can be really emotional, because you've made these wrenching changes. And sometimes there's still like hurt or anger or rejection or disappointment from all these things. And it can make you crunchier or like pessimistic or whatever. But I think as those things get healed, we'll be able to have like a fuller, life in all of this, and to be great witnesses. And
witnesses, outreach. That's the next thing I'm interested in. Helping people. I'm interested in, rooters, as I call them, Hebrew roots, are starting like charities and things. I want to see this stuff. I want to see us starting to make a splash in the public sphere and get attention. And it's happened. There was an organization who is Torah observant that went down to Hurricane
Houston,
Harvey, and helped a lot of people, helped a ton of people. And people are like, oh, where are you from? What church are you guys with? And just those sort of things, being able to be a witness to Christians, that is something I'm excited about. And also everyone, obviously.
Yeah, because I think another thing I've noticed is when you come into this, it's like your whole mission often shifts from like just sharing the gospel and letting people know that there's like this amazing gift available, to convincing Christians that they're wrong. Like, and you kind of forget about the like just Great Commission in general. And I know like making disciples, part of that is knowing how to walk. But
for sure.
I think it's exciting to like think about doing that more for everyone, and not just like going back to church and being like
although that's probably part of it.
yeah.
I really like what you said about, people need to, who are starting to realize that there is a lot of divisiveness, and sometimes when we leave the church, we bring the spirit of rightism with us, and I'm now right about everything, and if you're not on my page, then you're still wrong. Sorry. And I liked what you said about, we need to at least get on the same page when it comes to the tree trunk issues, or the tree bark issues or something.
Which is hard in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's so important, and that's of course what our heart is with Now You See TV, is to provide a platform for people, all different types of teachers and people who understand Torah, and they have different areas that God has revealed to them that they study out on their own, that they have a passion for. But maybe somebody's area of expertise is different than somebody else's, but that's not a reason to divide. And there's always room to, debate out the minors of the faith that really have a lot of areas to discuss and explore. And then of course on the majors, we need to have unity. And I think I think that is something that really does need to happen. And it is, exciting what you guys are talking about with evangelism and different ministries popping up, because that is something I've noticed, is that while, people are starting to realize what truth is, we still need to realize, the Great Commission is to go out and share the gospel and to love people. And we can't forget that. And that's very important.
And I think it's happening. And I think it's going to keep happening more and more. I think it takes some time once you realize, all right, everything I knew was wrong. Oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn. And it's awesome learning all that. And then, I'm sure you've heard this description. It's like a pendulum. And then I feel like you come back and you're like, all right, now I really need to create a community and help nurture that and reach out to people.
In college, this the staff worker for the Christian fellowship I was a part of, he always said, you can't just stay in the huddle. You got to run the play at a certain point. And I really liked that. And I think hopefully that will start to happen as we get our footing. Because I know there are a lot of things we want to re-examine and make sure we're not off like we felt like we were before. But
yeah. So this whole topic is super interesting, about people coming into this, and there's people watching this right now who might not have seen the film. They might not even have any idea what we're talking about people becoming Torah observant or keeping the feasts or Sabbaths. And so if you guys could address people who might not see this film and address some of the big concerns that pop up with people who are just in general Christianity, that are in a Protestant church or a Catholic church, that have never heard about any of this Torah stuff, how would you address them, and what would you tell them about your film in regards to working for salvation, or what the purpose of feasts and Sabbath and Torah is, and what does this all mean in regards to who Jesus was?
Do you want to go? I have something. Yeah. The thing that I think really made me start even thinking outside of, I don't want to say the box or anything like that, but basically what I'm trying to say is, when I was a Christian, I didn't realize it, but I believed a lot of unnecessary paradoxes in the Bible. I was inserting them. I was putting them in there in order to make things jive. One of them, the most important one for me, is that God created this law for these people, and he said that it would last forever. And God is unchanging. And then he changed the law and said it's no longer applicable. And this idea of the character of the creator of the heavens and the earth, who is our end all be all, point of worship, changing when he says he doesn't change, I think is misunderstanding his character. And I think that's the main point of the whole thing, is we should re-examine this idea that he's created something forever and then says it changes. And so that's what I think the film tries to do.
Another little kernel that kind of reminds me of is growing up and taking a lot of Christian theology classes. I went to Christian school and just really digging into the way the Bible is understood. There was always the idea that the purpose of the law is to show us that we can't live up to the standard, so that we'll run to Jesus for salvation, or basically to show us that we're super crappy and need help. But then when I went back to read, I was hearing God say the same thing over and over again about why he gave this law. And it was after he saved the people, and he kept saying that it may go well with you, that you may prosper and live long, that your kids' lives will be awesome, that your fields will be blessed, and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, that's not what I thought. That's not what I learned that the law was supposed to do. And then I started thinking, is it really the gospel that okay, let's say you do something where you get in trouble with the law and you go to court and the judge says, all right, you're off, you're free and clear. And the thing that you did is no longer illegal. Because in my theology before, it was like, you're off the hook for breaking the law, and these laws are no longer even laws. Like most of them, so don't even worry about it.
So it's like you get a traffic ticket, you go to court, you ran the red light, they say, all right, you were forgiving you the fine, but also you can run red lights.
And there's no speed limit. It's like, but we know that the lights, that infrastructure and the speed limit are there for safety and like to protect people and to like let the stuff flow.
To lead to life.
Yeah, and so once you see that, you're like, well, why would you want to take away these good instructions? And that's something that several of the people in the film kind of brought up, and some of the questions that like inspire us when we're making it.
That's the main thing I would want to say to like Christians watching this, just that re-examine the law, because it does lead to life. Those good things outlined in the Word are still good. Just go read it again, and yeah.
Whenever it came to the discussion with people who were trying to understand what I was doing and keeping the Sabbath and learning the Torah and eating differently, you know, what are you talking about? You don't want my bacon sandwich. I made this for you. But one of my best arguments or ways I addressed those was I would just not try to argue. And I would say, look, I'm just trying to be more like Jesus, more like Yeshua. And there isn't an argument against that, especially if you're sharing that with a Bible-believing Christian or somebody who has a heart for God and might not see this kind of stuff. You can't argue against being more like the Messiah, because that's so painted all over the New Testament that, you know, you can't. It's so hard to argue against that. They're like, well, but you don't have to. But I want to. But you don't have to. But see, it's so cool because you know, there's so many things that people can, you know, go back and forth about in regards to what Paul's wrote and whether you're taking Paul out of context, or you know, what is that vision that Peter had about, and people really like to go around the ringer and debate those things. But really, if you make the bottom line, I'm just trying to walk like my Messiah, there is no argument against that. And First John says that, you know, if we say we know him, we should walk as he walked. And that's an exciting thing. And I think that's really what the heart of your film was. And I really appreciate it.
And I should just say that, because I know that there might be lots of different kinds of people watching, and everyone we interviewed in the film who would consider themselves a believer, so like the priest and the pastor of like just a non-denominational Christian church, they all had that heart. Like they all had that desire. They would all agree that they would want to be like the Savior, and that was why that was like the central part of the film. And I think that can be like a commonality that we have when we start a conversation with people. Like most people would say, yeah, absolutely. Like as much as I understand, I want to walk like he's walking.
Yeah, so thank you guys for coming on and sharing with us. And I know you can't share about your upcoming projects, but we are definitely looking forward to seeing what you guys are working on and hearing more about that. And congratulations on the soon-to-be baby. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
I know.
It was a blast. It's a blast.
Awesome. And we did have one question somebody wrote in, and they were like, can the guests think about doing a future historical perspective show on how Protestants came to protest the Roman Catholic Church in the 16th century? They were asking if you'd consider doing a piece on that.
Well, okay. That's awesome. That's a great idea and a great realm of study. There's so much to be said about that. Absolutely. Thank you very much, whoever wrote that in.
How can people find this documentary? Where can they go to find, you know, you guys, or get in contact with you or see this film?
Yeah, if they go to www.thewaydoc.com, that's our hub online where they can watch little clips from the film. They can check it out in the extended edition and all that, and
email us too.
And
that's
find our email on there. And then we're also on Facebook. It's just The Way: a documentary, just to make sure people can find it from the other thing. It's called The Way. And they can click on that, and we like share clips on there sometimes from the film or things that didn't make it in, and we're kind of on there hanging out.
less than before. We're very baby centric,
Well, right now
but
we're
we'll
baby-centric.
respond. We'll
We'll
respond.
see, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys once again for coming on Now You See TV and talking about this film. And it's just been such a blessing to so many people that have watched it. And for those of you who have not seen it yet, please go and check it out at thewaydoc.com. I did put a link in the description if you're more click oriented and you don't want to type. But thank you everybody for watching Now You See TV. And until next time, shalom, everybody. Good night.